After 18 years of desperate searching, Clara Marin finally found her abducted daughter, Emmy, believing their reunion would mark the beginning of healing and rebuilding their shattered relationship. But her relief quickly turned to horror as she uncovered the shocking truth behind her daughter's disappearance 18 years ago, a betrayal that ran far deeper than she had ever imagined. The hope of rebuilding their relationship was threatened as mother and daughter were pulled into a web of buried secrets and dangerous people determined to keep the past hidden. Before we dive into part 2 of this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from today. And if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. 1 week had passed since Clara Marin discovered her long-lost daughter. The revelation that had begun with a magazine cover had transformed into a whirlwind of police interviews, tearful reunions, and tentative steps toward rebuilding a relationship shattered 18 years ago. Clara and Emmy sat across from each other at a corner table in Miller's Tavern, the rural establishment where their paths had intersected just 7 days earlier. The wooden interior felt different now, less mysterious, more comforting in its familiarity. Behind the bar, Bran Pledger mixed drinks with practiced ease, occasionally glancing their way with a smile of quiet support. "I never thought I'd be back here so soon," Clara said, running her finger along the rim of her glass, "but it feels right somehow. Full circle." Emmy nodded, her distinctive birthmark catching the warm light of the tavern. "I've been through this area countless times over the years, but I've never actually been inside this place until now. John and Miriam didn't approve of tavern." The week had been relentless. Hours of giving statements, answering questions from various law enforcement agencies. Each day seemed to bring investigators back with more queries, more forms to sign, more details to recall. The investigation had expanded beyond Emmy's abduction to target the creditor organization that doubled as a human trafficking network. For their safety, Emmy and Clara had been temporarily placed in secure accommodations in the rural Appalachian town while the investigation continued. Detective Gary Holden had been a constant presence, coordinating with local police and keeping them informed about developments in the case. "Detective Gary said we can finally go back to Asheville tomorrow," Clara said, relief evident in her voice. "Start rebuilding our lives there." Emmy's eyes lit up. "I still can't believe I'm going to see a real city. I mean, I've been to the local towns for supplies and doctor visits, but never somewhere like Asheville." "It's not exactly New York," Clara laughed, "but it's beautiful. You'll love it." Bran approached their table, bringing a fresh round of drinks. "These are on the house," he said, setting them down carefully. "A little celebration for your last night in our sleepy corner of nowhere." "Thank you, Bran," Clara smiled warmly, "for everything." He shrugged modestly. "Least I could do, considering." "Have you heard from your father?" Emmy asked, her voice soft with concern, despite everything Rowan had been part of. Bran's expression tightened slightly. "He's still helping the authorities. His trial date is set for 8 days from now." He turned to Clara. "The information he provided led the police to catch those creditors who were dealing with my mother back then, the ones who were after my dad's debt." "The traffickers," Clara clarified, her tone hardening slightly. Bran nodded. "They had a base here in Willow Reach. Police raided it a few days ago, but according to Dad, a few of the men escaped. The main base of their operation is still unknown." Clara took a sip of her drink, processing this. Detective Gary mentioned something about that. He said the Kessler farm was being used for money laundering, channeling funds from the trafficking organization. "Makes sense," Bran said, leaning against their table. "Farms are perfect for money laundering. Cash-based transactions make it easy to blend dirty money with legitimate income. Plus, there's all those physical assets, land, equipment, livestock, and out here in rural areas, audits are pretty light." "How would they do it exactly?" Emmy asked, curiosity evident in her voice. "Lots of ways," Bran replied. "Over-reporting or under-reporting crops and livestock to manipulate incoming or outgoing money, creating phantom harvests that never happened, listing fake employees or laborers on the payroll. Perfect setup, especially for a well-established farm like the Kesslers." Emmy shook her head, still processing the truth about the people who raised her. "I never suspected anything. They always seemed so normal, strict, but normal. Sensing the conversation heading into heavier territory, Emmy straightened in her chair and forced a smile. Let's talk about something more cheerful. I still can't believe that after 18 years I'm finally leaving this place. She chuckled softly, though I'll miss some things about it. Like what? Clara asked, eager to learn more about her daughter's life. The quiet mornings, the way fog hangs over the valley at dawn, even the smell of fresh hay. Emmy's eyes grew distant with memory. But I'm ready for something new. Trust me, Bran said with a grin. There's a whole world outside this boring rural place. You deserve to experience it all after everything you've been through. I'm nervous, Emmy admitted, but excited too. We'll take it one day at a time, Clara reassured her, reaching across the table to squeeze Emmy's hand. They finished their drinks, keeping the conversation light. As the evening wound down, Clara glanced at her watch. We should probably head back. Tomorrow will be a long day. The three said their goodbyes, with Bran wishing them well for their fresh start. Clara and Emmy walked out of Miller's tavern into the cool night air, making their way to Clara's car in the parking lot. As Clara settled behind the wheel, she glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. A man had just stepped out of a car parked at the far end of the lot, meeting with two other men in the shadows. Something about his profile, the way he carried himself, struck Clara as hauntingly familiar. David? She whispered, squinting to see better in the dim lighting. What's wrong? Emmy asked, noticing Clara's sudden tension. Clara continued staring into the mirror, but the three men had already entered the tavern, disappearing from view. Nothing, she said finally, shaking her head. I just thought I saw someone I knew, but it couldn't be. Are you sure you're okay to drive? Emmy pressed, concerned. We could always call a cab. I'm fine, Clara insisted, starting the engine. I barely touched my drink, just tired, I guess. As they drove through the quiet country roads toward their temporary accommodations, Emmy broke the comfortable silence. Clara, can I ask you something? Anything. When we get to Asheville, do you think I could look into treatments for this? Emmy touched her birthmark self-consciously. For the port wine stain. Clara glanced over, surprised. Why would you want to do that? Your birthmark is beautiful, special. Emmy sighed softly. In the bar tonight, I couldn't help noticing people staring. Not just a few girls, but men too, like I'm some kind of freak. Not everyone is like that, Clara countered gently. Bran doesn't see you that way. I know some people appreciate it, or at least don't judge, Emmy acknowledged. But if it's this noticeable in a small rural place, what will it be like in Asheville? Asheville is smaller than you might think, Clara said, and the community there is open-minded, accepting. Emmy nodded, but Clara could see uncertainty lingering in her eyes. Look, Clara said softly, I know this is a big change for you. This whole week has been life-altering. Start with one step at a time. If you still feel strongly about treatment later, we can look into options. It would be expensive, but if it's what you truly want, I'll support you. Don't birthmarks usually fade over time? Emmy asked. Sometimes, yes, but yours has always been... Clara searched for the right word. Stubborn, Emmy supplied with a small smile. Like me, apparently. She gazed out the window at the passing darkness. You're right about the cost. We should focus on rebuilding our lives first. Maybe I could find a job in Asheville after we settle in. They pulled into the parking lot of their temporary apartment building. As they exited the car, Clara instinctively reached for Emmy's hand. Remember, she said, you're not alone in this. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Emmy squeezed her hand in return, and together they entered the building, leaving the uncertainty of the night behind them. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect day for new beginnings. Clara was already dressed and moving efficiently around the apartment, double-checking that everything was packed for their departure to Asheville. She zipped their bags closed just as the intercom buzzed. Crossing to the wall unit, Clara pressed the button to activate the small screen. Detective Gary Holden's face appeared, his expression professional but friendly. Morning, Clara. We're here to escort you back to Asheville. "We'll be right down," she replied, buzzing him in. Emmy emerged from the bathroom, hair still damp from her shower. "Was that Detective Gary?" "Yes, he's here to take us home." Clara couldn't help the small thrill that ran through her at the word home with her daughter. They finished gathering their belongings as a knock sounded at the door. Clara opened it to find Detective Gary waiting in the hallway. "All set to go?" he asked. "Yes, we're ready," Clara confirmed. As she spoke, a figure appeared behind the detective, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. Standing there, looking slightly travel-worn but undeniably himself, was David Marin, her ex-husband and Emmy's father. "David," Clara gasped. "What are you doing here? I thought you were still in Colorado." David smiled, the familiar crinkles forming around his eyes. "I wanted to surprise you both." He stepped forward, extending his hand to Detective Gary. "I flew in this morning and went straight to the police station. Figured Gary here could bring me along." Emmy stood frozen, staring at the father she had never known. Her eyes moved quickly between Clara and David, searching for similarities, for connections. "You must be Emmy," David said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't tell you how long I've waited for this moment." A smile spread across Emmy's face, charmed by this unexpected reunion. "It's nice to meet you, Dad." The word sounded foreign on her tongue, yet somehow right. Clara, however, couldn't shake the nagging memory from the previous night. "David, were you at Miller's Tavern last night? I could have sworn I saw someone who looked just like you in the parking lot." David's expression remained casual. "No, like I said, I just arrived this morning. Came straight to the police station to meet Gary." He winked playfully. "Maybe you just missed me so much you started seeing things." "No, Clara began, then shook her head. "Never mind." David turned his attention back to Emmy. "I know this is all happening under unusual circumstances, but I'm so happy we can be together again like this. All three of us." Detective Gary cleared his throat. "If you're all ready, we should get going. It's a 2-hour drive back to Asheville." David and the detective helped carry the suitcases down to the waiting cars. Emmy followed, clearly excited by this unexpected development. Clara remained behind momentarily to handle the checkout at the front desk. While waiting for the desk clerk to process her paperwork, Clara quickly checked her phone, realizing she hadn't looked at her messages since the previous day. Among several work-related emails was one that caught her attention. From Lila Dalton, the photographer whose work had led Clara to Emmy. She opened it, curious. "Clara, I happen to be in Asheville with a journalist for another assignment, and I would love to meet you for coffee today at 3 p.m. if you're available, to hear about your reunion with your daughter. We're considering covering your remarkable story if you're open to sharing it. Looking forward to your response, Lila Dalton. P.S. We'd prefer to meet just with you to capture the story from your perspective. We'll reach out to Emmy separately at a later date." Clara frowned slightly at the postscript. Why would they want to separate them? Then again, perhaps they wanted her unfiltered emotions without Emmy present. The timing seemed unusually coincidental. How did Lila know they would be in Asheville today? But then, rereading the email, she noticed Lila mentioned being there for another assignment. Perhaps she had simply remembered Clara was from Asheville. Her checkout complete, Clara joined the others outside, finding Emmy chatting animatedly with David, while Detective Gary waited by his vehicle. "Everything okay?" the detective asked as she approached. "Yes, just finished checking out," Clara replied, then turned to the group. "I just received an email from Lila Dalton, the photographer who took Emmy's picture for the magazine. She's in Asheville and wants to meet me for coffee at 3. "You should go," David encouraged immediately. "It would be good for you." Clara hesitated. "It seems a bit rushed, and I was hoping to spend the day helping Emmy settle in." "Don't worry about me," Emmy assured her. "I'm not 5 years old anymore. I can take care of myself for a few hours." After a moment's consideration, Clara nodded and quickly typed a reply accepting the invitation. "While we're making plans," David said, turning to Detective Gary, "I was wondering if I might be able to see the Kessler farm before we leave. I'd like to understand where my daughter grew up." Gary frowned. "I'm afraid that's not possible. The property is still protected as part of an ongoing investigation." I understand, David persisted, but surely you could make an exception. I don't need to go inside, just see the place from the outside. It won't take long. The detective considered this request. It's about 20 minutes from here, he said finally. I could take you for a quick look, but no more than 15 minutes, and you can't enter any buildings, just the external grounds. That's all I'm asking, David agreed readily. Thank you. Clara and Emmy got into Clara's car, while David joined the detective in the police vehicle. As they pulled out of the apartment complex parking lot, Clara couldn't help feeling unsettled about the sudden change in plans. Are you okay with going to the farm? She asked Emmy, noticing her daughter's suddenly pensive expression. Emmy nodded slowly. Yes, I suppose it's fair that he wants to see where I grew up. After all, he just arrived this morning and hasn't been following the case like you have. Clara squeezed her hand reassuringly, trying to push aside her own misgivings as they followed Detective Gary's car toward the place that had been Emmy's prison and home for 18 years. The gravel crunched beneath the tires as they pulled into the familiar lot outside Kessler Farm. The property looked different in the morning light, less imposing than it had a week ago when Clara first arrived searching for her daughter, yet somehow more sinister now that she knew the truth about what had happened there. Detective Gary parked his vehicle, and Clara pulled in beside him. As they exited their cars, the detective reminded everyone, "Please don't touch anything. This is still an active crime scene." Emmy stared up at the farmhouse with a complex expression. "I think I'll stay in the car," she said quietly. "I'm not ready to be back there yet." Clara immediately placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. "I'll stay with you." "I understand," Detective Gary said sympathetically. "Mr. Marin and I will just take a quick look around. We won't be long." As the two men walked toward the farm buildings, Clara and Emmy remained by the car, stepping out only for some fresh air. The morning sun was warm on their faces, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and soil across the property. After a few minutes of silence, Emmy spoke. "Maybe one day, after I've had time to process everything, I'll want to find John and Miriam again. Ask them some questions." "What kind of questions?" Clara asked gently. Emmy sighed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I still don't understand why. If they wanted a child so badly, they kept me so isolated, made me cover my birthmark with makeup whenever we went out." Her fingers unconsciously traced the distinctive mark. "I know it was partly to avoid being discovered, but—" She trailed off, struggling with the contradiction. "But what bothers you most?" Clara prompted. "Why adopt a child with a birthmark in the first place if they were just going to try to hide it?" Emmy's voice grew stronger with frustration. Those people were traffickers. They must have had other options, other children without such a distinctive feature. Clara nodded slowly, contemplating this. "That's a good question. One I'd like the answer to as well." "I asked the police," Emmy continued, "but they said John and Miriam never gave a clear answer, just that they were drawn to me at first sight." She scoffed softly. "That doesn't make sense now." "Sometimes love comes with control," Clara said thoughtfully. "People try to protect what they treasure, even if they do it in harmful ways." "I suppose so," Emmy conceded, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. Their conversation was interrupted as they noticed Detective Gary standing alone near the farmhouse, answering a phone call while David was nowhere in sight. "I'm going to take a last look around," Clara decided suddenly. "Are you okay here by yourself for a few minutes?" Emmy nodded. "Go ahead, I'll be fine." Clara walked across the property, passing Detective Gary, who acknowledged her with a brief smile as he continued his call. As she approached the farmhouse, she spotted David emerging from the front door, exactly where the detective had explicitly forbidden anyone to enter. Suspicion flaring, Clara quickened her pace. David looked startled when he noticed her approaching, clearly not expecting to be caught. "What are you doing?" Clara demanded. "Gary specifically said no one should go inside." David recovered quickly, his charm sliding back into place. "I just took a quick peek. You know me. I've always been curious." "Yes, I do know you," Clara replied, studying his face carefully. always stubborn, always making use of opportunities. David's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. I just wanted to see the kind of home my daughter was raised in. Is that so wrong? Before Clara could press further, Detective Gary appeared behind them. We need to go, he said firmly. You shouldn't be standing this close to the police line. Clara and David made their way back to the vehicles, but an uneasy feeling clung to Clara. She could tell David was hiding something. She saw it in how he avoided her eyes, in the subtle stiffness of his shoulders. As they reached the cars and went separately inside, Clara cast one final glance at the farmhouse. Had David really just taken a quick look inside? What else could he have done? The drive back to Asheville took about 2 hours, the scenery gradually shifting from rural farmland to the rolling mountains, and eventually the charming streets of the city Clara called home. The sun was high in the sky by the time they reached the outskirts of town. Clara's phone rang, David's name flashing on the screen. I have a surprise for Emmy, he said when she answered. I own an apartment here in Asheville that she could use if she wants. It's fully furnished. She'd just need to pick up some basic necessities. She can stay there as long as she needs. Clara glanced at Emmy in the passenger seat. Your father has an apartment in Asheville he's offering you, she explained, covering the phone slightly. It's up to you whether you want to live there or stay with me. Emmy seemed surprised by the offer. I'd love to stay with you, she said thoughtfully. But I've been thinking about what Bran said last night. Maybe I should try living on my own. I've been with adults my entire life, and I feel like I need to start building my own identity. Clara nodded understanding, though a small part of her had hoped Emmy would choose to stay with her. She'd like to see the apartment, she told David. When they arrived at the address David provided, they found Detective Gary already inspecting the premises. The apartment was in a modern building with good security features, a relief to Clara, who was still concerned about the trafficking organization that remained at large. This is a good place, Detective Gary approved as they toured the unit. Proper security, good neighborhood. He checked his watch and frowned. I need to get back to the station. Another case requires my attention, but call if you need anything. After the detective departed, the three of them relaxed in the living room of the apartment. Clara looked around the space, noting the quality furnishings and the excellent view of downtown Asheville. I never knew you had an apartment here, she remarked to David again, unable to keep the suspicion from her voice. David shrugged casually. I bought it years ago after our divorce, just as an investment. I rented it to various tenants. He avoided her gaze slightly. We were out of each other's lives, so I never mentioned it when I was in town. And honestly, my new wife wouldn't have liked it if I visited you. Clara walked to the window and pointed to a brick building a few blocks away. That's the library where I work, Emmy. We could walk there in about 10 minutes. Speaking of future plans, David said, turning to Emmy, I want to help you start your new life. Have you thought about college or university? Emmy looked surprised by the question. You're 20 years old, David continued. With your homeschool high school degree, you could benefit from higher education before entering the job market. I'd be happy to help with enrollment and tuition. That's very generous, Clara interjected, but Emmy should take things slowly. There's no rush. David nodded. Of course, though mid-year enrollment is closing soon. If we miss that window, you'd have to wait until the next period, probably in 6 months. I'd love to go to college, Emmy said, her eyes brightening. I never had school friends growing up. It would be a great chance to meet people my age and build a social life. As she spoke, her hand unconsciously moved to touch her birthmark. The gesture didn't escape Clara's notice. You're beautiful just as you are, Clara assured her. True friends will love you exactly as you are. Colorado has excellent aesthetic clinics and dermatology specialists, David interjected. Laser treatments can significantly reduce port wine birthmarks these days. Emmy perked up visibly. Is it expensive? The treatment? Probably, David admitted, but I'd be happy to cover it as a reunion gift. Consider it making up for 18 years of missed birthdays. Clara sighed, frustrated by David's interference. Maybe we should take things one step at a time, she suggested firmly. Moving to Colorado and undergoing laser treatments are major decisions. It's not just about money. Emmy's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. You're right, she agreed after a moment. We shouldn't rush into anything, especially with the investigation still ongoing. I should wait until we're sure everything is safe. David appeared momentarily disappointed, but recovered quickly. You're both right about the treatments, he conceded, but the education timeline is real. Mid-year enrollment will close at the end of this month. After that, you'd have to wait until December or January. That's no problem, Clara countered. Emmy could work part-time for 6 months and then start college when she's ready. The atmosphere had grown tense, so Emmy quickly intervened. I'll think about everything and make my decisions when I'm ready, she assured them both, then turned to Clara with a smile. You were right about my father. He does have a strong personality like me. Clara laughed, grateful for the shift in mood. Yes, you're both definitely cut from the same cloth. As the conversation naturally wound down, David checked his watch. Clara, don't forget you have that meeting with Lila Dalton at 3. You should probably start getting ready. Clara glanced at the time. I should take Emmy shopping first. This place literally has nothing in it. I can handle that, David offered immediately. You go home and get ready. Emmy and I can pick up some groceries and necessities. Emmy nodded in agreement. Yes, I'd like some time to get to know my father better. We have a lot of catching up to do. Though reluctant to leave Emmy so soon with a man she hadn't met for 18 years, Clara understood Emmy's desire to bond with her father. With a final hug and promise to check in later, she left for her own home, pushing aside the lingering unease that had been building since David's unexpected appearance that morning. Instead of going directly home, Clara drove to the Asheville Public Library. The familiar building welcomed her like an old friend, its brick facade and wide steps unchanged, despite all that had happened in her life over the past week. Inside, several of her colleagues rushed to greet her, their faces alight with excitement. We saw everything on the TV news, Sarah exclaimed, embracing Clara warmly. We're so happy for you. How is she? Your daughter, Marty from Reference asked eagerly. Clara found herself surrounded by her work family, all of them genuinely thrilled by her miraculous reunion with Emmy. Their support was touching, yet Clara couldn't fully immerse herself in their celebration. Something kept nagging at her. David's unexpected appearance, his suspicious behavior at the farm, his eagerness to separate her from Emmy. When the initial excitement calmed, Clara pulled Sarah aside. I need to talk to you about something, she said quietly. Something doesn't feel right. In the staff room, over hastily made cups of tea, Clara explained her concerns about David. I think I saw him at Miller's Tavern last night, meeting with 2 men. But when I mentioned it, he denied being there, insisting he just arrived this morning. Sarah frowned. That is strange. Then at the Kessler farm, he went inside the house when Detective Gary wasn't looking. And now he's suddenly talking about taking Emmy to Colorado for college and treatments for her birthmark. Maybe he's just excited to meet his daughter after 18 years, Sarah suggested reasonably. It would be natural for him to want to help her. I know, Clara sighed, but something feels off, and he has another wife, so why this sudden interest in Emmy's future? Why offer to pay for expensive treatments and college? When you put it that way, it does sound suspicious, Sarah agreed. What are you going to do? I'm not sure yet, Clara admitted, but I think I need to learn more about what David's been doing all these years. With renewed purpose, Clara moved to one of the library computers and began researching her ex-husband's business activities. If he could afford an apartment in Asheville, plus expensive medical treatments and college tuition, he must be doing well financially. She found several articles about David's business ventures. Apparently, he owned multiple cloud kitchen spaces in Colorado, facilities people could rent for cooking and recording content for videos or TV shows. It seemed like a lucrative operation, but Clara frowned as she read further. When David had left her after Ella's disappearance, he'd been working in civil service, a steady but modest-paying job with the local government. The sudden transformation into a successful businessman struck Clara as unusual. Where had the startup capital come from? How had he developed such business acumen? His wife, perhaps? On a hunch, Clara searched for information about his wife. The articles mentioned her name, Tazia Marin. Driven by curiosity and growing suspicion, Clara found Tazia's social media profile and sent her a carefully worded message. "Hello, Tazia. I'm David's ex-wife, Clara. I'm sure you've heard he's in Asheville now after we found our daughter. I hope we can meet someday. Wishing you well." She tried to keep the message light and non-confrontational, not wanting to raise any alarms. After sending it, Clara checked the time. It was approaching 3 p.m. She needed to leave for her meeting with Lila Dalton. Clara arrived at the cafe designated in the email and found a quiet table by the window. After 15 minutes of waiting with no sign of Lila or any journalist, she began to worry. She checked the email again and sent a follow-up message asking if they were still planning to meet. No response. With growing unease, Clara called the main number for Vogue magazine that she had saved from her previous conversations with them. "Hello, I'm trying to reach Lila Dalton," she explained when the receptionist answered. "Is she currently in Asheville?" "Ms. Dalton," the receptionist repeated. "No, she's currently in Los Angeles for a shoot. She won't be back on the East Coast until next week." Clara's blood ran cold. "You're certain? She didn't send a team to Asheville for an interview today." "Absolutely not," the receptionist confirmed. "Is there a problem?" "Thank you for your help," Clara replied, avoiding the question. She hung up, her mind racing. If Lila wasn't in Asheville, who had sent the email? And why fabricate a meeting that would separate her from Emmy? As these thoughts swirled through her mind, Clara's phone pinged with a notification. It was a response from Tazia. "Clara, I'm no longer married to David. We divorced 10 years ago. Last I heard from mutual friends, he had moved to a different state, but no one seems to know where. I hope you and your daughter are safe." 10 years ago. The room seemed to tilt around Clara as the truth crashed down on her. David hadn't just lied about entering the farmhouse. He might have been lying about his entire life. There was no wife in Colorado. And his business? Could that be a fabrication too? The articles she'd seen online appeared credible, but now even they felt suspect. How much of David's story was real, and how much was a carefully woven illusion? Panic surged through Clara as she tried to call Emmy. No answer. She tried David's number, same result. As fear threatened to overwhelm her, Clara forced herself to think clearly. She dialed Detective Gary's number, relieved when he answered on the second ring. "Detective, it's Clara Marin. I think Emmy is in danger." Clara sprinted to her car, her heart pounding with fear and determination. While driving toward Emmy's apartment, she explained everything to Detective Gary over speakerphone. "First, I saw David at the Kessler farmhouse when you weren't looking," she said, her voice tense. "He walked inside when he wasn't supposed to. And last night, I'm certain I saw him at Miller's Tavern with 2 men, even though he claimed to have just arrived this morning." "What else?" Gary pressed, the sound of shuffling papers in the background, suggesting he was already mobilizing resources. "I just learned he's been lying about his life in Colorado. He doesn't have a current wife. They divorced 10 years ago. No one knows where he's been living." "Stay where you are," Gary instructed firmly. "Don't approach them alone. I'll send officers to the apartment immediately." "I can't just wait," Clara protested, already pulling onto the street where the apartment building stood. "She's my daughter." Gary's voice softened slightly. "I understand, but if David is involved with these traffickers, he could be dangerous. Meet us at the apartment, but don't go up alone." Clara parked hastily outside the building and rushed to the entrance. She pressed Emmy's apartment number on the intercom repeatedly, but received no answer. Frustrated, she approached the front desk. "Excuse me, I need to check on my daughter in apartment 403, she explained urgently. "We were just here a few hours ago with Detective Gary Holden." The receptionist regarded her sympathetically but shook her head. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't give you access to another resident's apartment without their permission." "But you saw us earlier. She's only been living here for a few hours," Clara pressed. "I understand, but rules are rules," the receptionist replied firmly. "I can try calling the apartment for you if you'd like." Before Clara could respond, her phone rang. Detective Gary again. "Clara, where are you?" he asked without preamble. "At the apartment building, but they won't let me up," she replied. "Perhaps that's for the best right now," Gary said. "Listen carefully. Willow Reach police just contacted me. Someone tipped them off about documents in the Kessler farmhouse, transaction records containing an address that might be the traffickers' main headquarters." Clara's blood ran cold. "Documents in the farmhouse where David went inside when you weren't looking." "Exactly," Gary confirmed. "Now that we know we can't trust him, this could be a false lead, or worse, a trap. I've warned them to approach with caution. In the meantime, I've alerted border patrols and transportation hubs to watch for David." Clara pressed a hand to her forehead, trying to think. Emmy mentioned they were going grocery shopping, she remembered suddenly. There's only one major supermarket near the apartment. "I'll meet you there," Gary decided. "Don't approach them if you see them. Wait for backup." Clara ended the call and rushed back to her car, desperation clawing at her chest. The thought of losing Emmy again after just finding her was unbearable. She wouldn't let that happen. The drive to the supermarket took only minutes, but each second felt like an eternity. As she pulled into the parking lot, Clara scanned the area frantically for any sign of Emmy or David. Inside the store, she rushed through each aisle, drawing curious glances from other shoppers as she searched desperately. No Emmy, no David. Back in the parking lot, she spotted Detective Gary arriving with several officers. She hurried to meet them. "They're not here," she reported breathlessly. "I've checked everywhere." Gary nodded grimly. "We need to review the security footage. If they were here at all, we'll see where they went." Together, they approached the supermarket's security office. After Gary showed his badge and explained the urgency of the situation, the security team agreed to review their footage immediately. On the monitors, they watched as David and Emmy entered the store approximately an hour earlier. They barely browsed the aisles before David received a phone call. After that, they quickly exited without purchasing anything. "Can you show us the parking lot footage?" Gary requested. The security officer switched cameras, and they watched as David and Emmy met two men by a black SUV. All four got into the vehicle and drove away. "Pause and zoom in on those men," Gary instructed. Clara leaned forward, studying the grainy images. "Those are the same men I saw with David at Miller's Tavern last night," she confirmed, her voice hollow with dread. Gary quickly noted the vehicle's license plate and time of departure. "They left about an hour and 50 minutes ago," he calculated. "If they were moving quickly, they could have already left Asheville." Within minutes, Gary had coordinated with police departments in surrounding counties. The tension in the security office was palpable as they waited for any news. Finally, Gary's radio crackled to life. "Detective Holden, we've received a report of your target vehicle entering Macon County, attempting to track through street cameras now." Clara felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. They had a lead, but Emmy had been gone for nearly 2 hours, traveling with men connected to a trafficking organization. "I'm coming with you," she told Gary, her tone leaving no room for argument. After a moment's hesitation, Gary nodded. "Leave your car here, you'll ride with me." As they hurried to Gary's vehicle, Clara sent up a silent prayer for her daughter's safety. She couldn't lose Emmy again, not when they had only just found each other. The police cruiser sped down the highway toward Macon County, lights flashing but sirens silent. Detective Gary kept one hand on the wheel while the other operated his radio, coordinating with various law enforcement agencies across the region. Clara sat rigid in the passenger seat, straining to hear each update. "Update from Willow Reach," Gary reported grimly after one call. "The address from those farmhouse documents was a trap. There was a gunfight when officers arrived. One officer injured, but they managed to capture 3 men." "Are they talking? Do they know where David might be taking Emmy?" Clara asked urgently. Gary shook his head. "They say they were just hired muscle, paid to take down anyone who came through the door. Apparently they had no idea it would be the police. One of them let slip to the officers on scene that his boss was getting ready to vanish. No one knows where he's headed." Clara clenched her fists in frustration. So David was working with them all along. He must have planted those documents to distract the police while he took Emmy. It's looking that way, Gary confirmed, his expression grim. No wonder he was so eager to see the farm this morning. He needed to plant the false lead. And no wonder he was so eager for me to leave for that Lila Dalton. That was a trap too, so he could separate me from Emmy quickly. They continued driving deeper into Macon County, following the route that local police had tracked the black SUV taking. The landscape grew increasingly rural, with small towns giving way to scattered farmhouses and thick forests. As they approached an intersection where a small country road met the highway, Clara suddenly leaned forward, pointing through the windshield. "There's something happening over there," she said urgently. Gary slowed the cruiser, noticing a small crowd gathered by the roadside. Emergency lights flashed in the distance. "Stay in the car," he instructed Clara as he pulled over, but she was already opening her door, driven by maternal instinct and desperate hope. As they approached the commotion, Clara's heart nearly stopped. In the center of the gathering was Emmy, being attended to by paramedics. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her face scratched, and she was clearly in shock, unable to speak, as medical personnel examined her injuries. "Emmy!" Clara cried, rushing forward. The paramedics made way for her as she knelt beside her daughter. Emmy's eyes were vacant, her body trembling slightly, but she seemed to recognize Clara, leaning into her embrace. "What happened here?" Gary demanded, addressing the local police officers who had secured the scene. "Witness reports indicate a black SUV was driving through when a female passenger suddenly jumped from the moving vehicle," an officer explained. A male passenger, later identified as David Marin, pursued her on foot, but the two other men in the vehicle opened fire, apparently shooting at both of them. "David was shot?" Clara asked, looking up from Emmy. The officer nodded. "Yes, ma'am, he's being treated in another ambulance. The female, your daughter, I presume, managed to evade the gunfire. One of our witnesses was a military veteran who happened to be heading to a shooting range. He had a licensed shotgun in his trunk and used it to subdue the two shooters before they could escape or cause further harm." "They're in custody," Gary confirmed. "Yes, sir, being processed now." Clara turned her attention back to Emmy, who remained silent, her eyes unfocused. "Is she going to be all right?" she asked one of the paramedics anxiously. "Physically, her injuries appear superficial. Cuts, bruises, possible dislocation in her right arm," the paramedic replied. "But she's experiencing acute psychological trauma. We need to transport her to the hospital immediately for a full evaluation." "I'm coming with her," Clara stated firmly. The paramedic nodded, understanding. "Of course." Meanwhile, Detective Gary was coordinating with the local police, examining the black SUV and questioning the subdued gunman. "We need to get her to the hospital now," a paramedic announced, helping Emmy onto a stretcher. "Her blood pressure is dropping." Clara climbed into the ambulance beside her daughter, holding her hand tightly as the vehicle pulled away from the scene, sirens wailing. Through the rear windows, Clara caught a glimpse of another ambulance where David was being treated, surrounded by police officers. Even though she couldn't yet see the entire puzzle, one thing was undeniable. Her husband was connected to a dangerous trafficking organization that sold her daughter to the Kesslers, regardless of his role or whatever he intended to do here. The contrast hit her with sharp, unforgiving clarity. Now, after 18 years, he had resurfaced to try and reclaim her, but for what unknowable reason? As the ambulance sped toward the hospital, Clara whispered reassurances to Emmy, who remained unresponsive, locked in the prison of her trauma. Clara silently vowed that she would never let anyone harm her daughter again, no matter what it took. The emergency room bustled with activity as Emmy was rushed through the sliding doors on a stretcher, Clara hurrying alongside. Medical staff immediately surrounded them, asking questions about Emmy's condition that Clara could only partially answer. "Her name is Emmy Wells. Legally, though her birth name is Ella Marin," Clara explained rapidly. "She's 20 years old. I don't know her medical history. We were only reunited last week after she was abducted as a toddler." The doctors exchanged glances at this unusual explanation, but maintained their professional focus. "She's in shock," one nurse observed. "Blood pressure is low but stable. multiple contusions, possible right shoulder dislocation. "We need to take her for x-rays," a doctor decided. "Ma'am, you'll need to wait here." Clara reluctantly released Emmy's hand, watching helplessly as they wheeled her daughter away through swinging doors. Left alone in the waiting area, Clara sank into a molded plastic chair, her body suddenly heavy with exhaustion and worry. Minutes stretched into an hour as Clara waited for news about Emmy's condition. Throughout this time, police officers came and went, occasionally updating her on the situation. David had been taken to surgery to remove a bullet from his leg. The two gunmen were in custody and being questioned. Police were coordinating a search for Alexander Andreevsky, the alleged mastermind of the trafficking operation. Finally, a doctor emerged to speak with Clara. "Mrs. Marin, your daughter's physical injuries are relatively minor, cuts, bruises, and a partial dislocation of her right shoulder, which we've reduced. We've sedated her lightly to help with the pain and to allow her to rest." "And psychologically?" Clara asked, dreading the answer. The doctor's expression grew more serious. "She's experiencing acute stress reaction, what we commonly call psychological shock. She's not speaking, though she seems to understand what's happening around her. I'd like to consult with our psychiatric team about next steps, but for now, rest is the best medicine." "Can I see her?" "Of course, she's been moved to a room upstairs. We'd like to keep her overnight for observation." As Clara followed the doctor to Emmy's room, a police officer approached them in the hallway. "Mrs. Marin, I have an update for you," he said. "Detective Holden asked me to keep you informed." Clara paused. "Go ahead." "We've been questioning the men from the SUV," the officer explained. "They admitted to being close associates of Mr. Marin during their time working together and shared some disturbing details. It seems your ex-husband, David Marin, has had a deeply entangled relationship with both the Kessler family and Alexander Andreevsky's trafficking organization." "What kind of relationship?" Clara asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "According to our preliminary investigation, Mr. Marin was the one who arranged for Maurice Pledger to abduct your daughter 18 years ago. He told Pledger that if she did it, her husband's gambling debts would be erased." Clara's legs threatened to give way beneath her. "David sold our daughter? His own child?" The officer nodded grimly. "The suspects claim David had told them many times how he was unhappy with your marriage and resented the modest lifestyle you had as a librarian. Apparently, he was already working for Andreevsky during that time, and when the opportunity arose, he left you. Using Maurice as the front, they sold Ella to the Kesslers, believing she'd have a better life with a wealthy family. He knew he couldn't raise her himself, not with the kind of work he was involved in. He's been laundering money for Andreevsky, which explains the front of his so-called business." "Why the Kesslers specifically, and why did they accept a child with such a distinctive birthmark if they were trying to hide her origins?" "The arrangement was mutually beneficial," the officer explained. "Your husband needed a wealthy family to raise Ella, and the Kesslers wanted a child. They got both, a daughter and a financial boost to grow their farm, courtesy of the trafficking network's laundering operation. They wouldn't dare mistreat Emmy, not with the kind of people who brokered the deal, keeping an eye on things." Clara struggled to process this betrayal. Then after all these years, when David heard I'd found Emmy, he came to Willow Reach, supposedly to tie up loose ends for Andreevsky by planting false leads for the police. But it seems he had his own agenda, to take Emmy for himself. Why? After 18 years, why would he suddenly want her back? The officer hesitated. "We're not entirely sure yet. The suspects weren't privy to his personal motivations." Clara nodded distractedly, her mind reeling from these revelations. "Thank you for telling me. Please keep me updated on any further developments." The officer assured her they would, then departed. Clara continued following the doctor to Emmy's room, her heart heavy with the knowledge of David's betrayal. Emmy lay in the hospital bed, her injured arm immobilized, her face pale against the white pillows. Though her eyes were open, she seemed distant, locked in some interior space where Clara couldn't reach her. "Hey," Clara said softly, taking a seat beside the bed. "I'm here." Emmy didn't respond verbally, but her eyes tracked to Clara's face, a flicker of recognition passing through them. "You're safe now," Clara continued, gently taking Emmy's uninjured hand. "The police have those men in custody. They can't hurt you anymore." A tear slipped down Emmy's cheek, the first visible emotion she'd shown since the incident. "The doctor says you're going to be okay physically," Clara told her. "Your shoulder will heal. The rest, well, they have people who can help with that too. Trauma specialists." Emmy's lips trembled slightly, but she remained silent. Clara leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am so proud of you. You saved yourself, Emmy. You had the courage to jump from that car when you realized something was wrong. That was incredibly brave." Another tear followed the first, then another. Gradually, Emmy's breathing quickened, her chest rising and falling with suppressed emotion. "It's okay to cry," Clara assured her. "It's okay to feel whatever you're feeling right now." The dam broke. Emmy's face crumpled as silent sobs shook her body. Clara carefully gathered her daughter into her arms, mindful of her injuries, and held her as years of confusion, fear, and betrayal poured out. When Emmy's tears finally subsided, she pulled back slightly, her eyes red but clearer than before. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, frustration evident in her expression. "You don't have to talk right now," Clara reassured her. "There's plenty of time for that when you're ready." But Emmy shook her head determinedly. She swallowed hard, then forced out words that were barely audible. "I wanted to go with him." "What?" Clara asked gently, leaning closer to hear. Emmy's voice grew marginally stronger. "At first, I wanted to go with him. He promised college and treatments." She touched her birthmark with trembling fingers. "We went to the grocery store, but never shopped." Clara nodded encouragingly, keeping her hand over Emmy's. "He asked me to get in the car," Emmy continued haltingly. "Said those men were his staff. Said we were just going for a short trip, to bond, before returning to the apartment." She paused, gathering strength before continuing. "I didn't know the roads or where we were going. Then one of the men got a call. Something about a plan failing. Police looking for someone named Marin and Andreevsky." Emmy's breathing quickened as the memory surged back. David looked upset. He told them to drive him to his house in Macon, to hide him from Andreevsky, and to tell no one where he was. Promised them more money. A bitter smile curved her lips. "That's when I knew he was lying. Said his house was in Colorado, but it was here, in the middle of nowhere, and he's a wanted man." "What happened then?" Clara prompted gently when Emmy fell silent. "We fought when I asked to go back to Asheville, back to you." Emmy's voice broke slightly. "He told me to be quiet, said he would explain everything. I was so scared. They would take me somewhere I didn't know, like before, so I jumped and ran." She closed her eyes as if the memory was too heavy to fully relive. "He ran after me, but then they started shooting. At both of us. I don't know why they betrayed and were shooting at him too. It's all so messed up." Emmy opened her eyes, fixing Clara with a gaze full of guilt and regret. "I'm so sorry. I should have gone with you. To your home. Should never have trusted him." "No," Clara said firmly, cupping Emmy's face in her hands. "This is not your fault. None of it is. He manipulated you, manipulated both of us." Fresh tears welled in Emmy's eyes. "Please don't make me tell this story again," she whispered. "Not to the police, not to anyone." "I promise," Clara reassured her, stroking Emmy's hair gently. "They can hear it from me. You don't have to relive it again." Emmy nodded gratefully, her eyelids growing heavy as exhaustion and medication began to overtake her. Clara continued to hold her hand, watching as her daughter drifted into sleep, her face finally peaceful after the day's ordeal. Outside the window, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the hospital grounds. Clara knew there would be more challenges ahead: legal proceedings, psychological healing, rebuilding their fragmented relationship. But for now, this quiet moment of connection was enough. After 18 years apart and a day of unimaginable betrayal, they had found their way back to each other. The gentle beeping of medical monitors provided a rhythmic backdrop to the quiet hospital room. Clara had dozed off in the visitor's chair beside Emmy's bed, her hand still loosely holding her daughter's. The morning sunlight filtered through the partially drawn blinds, casting warm stripes across the institutional tile floor. A soft knock at the door roused Clara from her light sleep. A nurse entered, smiling apologetically for the disturbance. "Sorry to wake you," she said quietly. "The doctor will be making rounds soon to check on Emmy." Clara straightened in her chair, wincing at the stiffness in her neck from the awkward sleeping position. "Thank you," she whispered. As the nurse checked Emmy's vital signs, Clara stepped into the hallway to stretch her legs. A police officer stood stationed by the door, a precautionary measure Detective Gary had insisted upon until Alexander Andreevsky was apprehended. He acknowledged Clara with a respectful nod. "Any news?" she asked him. "Nothing major overnight, ma'am," he replied. "Detective Holden said he'd be by this morning with an update." Clara thanked him and was about to return to the room when she spotted Detective Gary walking down the corridor, carrying 2 paper cups of what smelled like decent coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said, handing her one of the cups. "You're a lifesaver," Clara replied gratefully, accepting the offering. "How's the investigation going?" Gary glanced around the busy hallway. "Let's find somewhere more private to talk." They found a quiet corner somewhere out of earshot. "David Marin is out of surgery," he began. "The bullet was removed successfully from his leg. He's under guard and will be formally charged once he's medically cleared." "Charged with what exactly?" Clara asked. "For starters, kidnapping, human trafficking, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and possibly attempted murder, depending on what we can prove about yesterday's incident." Gary took a sip of his coffee. "The 2 men from the SUV are cooperating in exchange for potential leniency. They've confirmed that David was involved from the very beginning of Ella's abduction." Clara nodded, having already heard the outline of this from the officer the previous evening. "What they've added," Gary continued, "is that David wasn't just involved with the trafficking organization. He worked for them regularly as a fixer. He was the middleman who laundered the money and connected desperate people with the organization." "Like Maurice Pledger," Clara said bitterly. "Exactly. And according to these men, David was sent to Willow Reach after news broke about Emmy's discovery. His mission was to kill her, and you. It was a test of loyalty. The 2 men were sent with him to ensure he followed through, to plant false leads and tie up any loose ends. But apparently he went off script, decided to take Emmy for himself instead of carrying out the hit." "That's what I don't understand," Clara admitted. "Why would the organization suddenly want to kill Emmy, and why would David want to keep her after 18 years? Gary hesitated before answering. "We're still piecing this together, but from what we've gathered, they could have believed Emmy might have information about the organization's financial operations. The Kesslers had been laundering money through their farm for years, and Emmy grew up there. She might have seen things, heard conversations, without realizing their significance." "So David wanted, what?" "Use her as leverage, maybe. Could be against Andreevsky. There might be some kind of power struggle," Gary suggested. "The organization's starting to crack under the pressure of our investigation. But for now, it's all speculation. We won't know the full truth until we hear it from David himself." Clara shook her head in disgust. "And to think I was once married to him." Clara chose her words carefully. "The man I married was kind, or so I thought. Charming, ambitious." She sighed deeply. "People can hide their true natures very effectively," Gary said gently, "even from those closest to them." They sat in silence for a moment, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Finally, Clara asked, "What about Emmy? Is she still in danger?" "We believe the immediate threat has passed," Gary assured her. "The Kesslers are in custody. David is under guard. Most of Andreevsky's local associates have been apprehended. That said, we're still searching for Andreevsky himself, so we'll maintain protection for both you and Emmy until he's in custody." "And after that? What happens to Emmy legally? She's lived her entire life as Emmy Wells. Her documents are all forgeries. She has no official education records, no social security number under her real name. We have specialists who handle these situations, Gary explained. It's complicated but not insurmountable. Emmy will have the option to maintain Emmy Wells with proper documentation. Clara nodded, relieved to hear there was a path forward through the bureaucratic challenges. And what about finding a place to live? I don't think either of us feels safe in Asheville right now, but we can't stay in this hospital forever. We can arrange temporary housing until you decide on a more permanent solution, Gary offered. Somewhere secure, with police protection if necessary. Thank you, Clara said sincerely, for everything you've done. I know this case has consumed your life for the past week. Gary smiled wryly. 18 years, more accurately. Ella's disappearance was my first major case. I've never quite let it go. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only when a nurse poked her head into the room. Mrs. Marin, Emmy is awake and asking for you. Clara quickly stood, thanking Gary again before hurrying back to Emmy's room. She found her daughter sitting up in bed, looking more alert than she had since the incident. Hey, Clara greeted her softly. How are you feeling this morning? Emmy considered the question seriously. Sore, confused, angry. She met Clara's eyes directly. But better than yesterday. Clara took a seat beside the bed, relief washing over her at hearing Emmy speak so clearly. That's good. The doctor should be here soon to check on you. Emmy nodded absently, her hand instinctively touching her birthmark. I've been thinking, she said after a pause. All my life I felt like I was hiding. The Kesslers made me cover this. She traced the outline of her birthmark. Then David, he offered to have it removed. But I don't want it gone anymore. It's part of who I am. It's how I survived all of this. A knock at the door signaled the arrival of the doctor. As he entered to examine Emmy, Clara stepped back but remained close by, watching protectively as her daughter answered the doctor's questions with growing confidence. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be legal proceedings, therapy sessions, adjustments to a new life and relationship. The shadows of trauma wouldn't disappear overnight. But as Clara observed the quiet determination in Emmy's eyes, so like her own, she felt a profound sense of hope. Life had given them both a second chance, not to recapture what was lost, but to build something new from the fragments of their shattered past. Together, they would face whatever challenges came next, one day at a time, strengthened by a bond that even 18 years of separation couldn't permanently destroy.